Well, given all of the Fed speak and central banks moving rates all around the world, let's see how NAB traders are moving on the news. Gemma Dale is joining us now. Gemma, hi, Friday. Good to see you there. Have we seen a lot of action on the NAB trade platform this week?
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like it's all happening from a macro perspective, and there's so much for investors to watch and to process and potentially to trade. They are not trading. This is clearly, we'll have plenty of investors. We've mentioned this so many times, but half of our base are new to market in the last 2 years or since COVID, right? So they have come to market very recently, really, and they've only seen that extraordinary bounce out of COVID. The whole buy the dip mentality was quite strong. And we're not talking day trading or crazy behavior, but people found that if you bought something that had fallen quite sharply, it was probably going to bounce and you were probably going to do really well out of it, right? So we have a lot of investors who had that experience as their very first moment in markets. And then we have other investors who've been around a really long time and they have seen many cycles and they're very familiar with the fact that doesn't always happen. Those guys are still trading. The newer investors are very, very cautious in this environment. And I think that's a great thing, right? You want to see people watching and learning in this environment rather than just running in and then wondering why the rally didn't last and they've just gone back to where they started. But yeah, it's quite fascinating. So volumes are way down. I mean, that's true right across the ASX. It's not specific to our platform. People are really struggling to find value. They're really struggling to process the outlook. Suddenly cash is far more attractive than it has been for many, many years. There are many reasons for people to not go tearing headlong into markets, and that is clearly what they're doing. It is only the investors who have been doing this for a long time who are confident with their trades at the moment, and they're moving quite some sort of meaningful amounts of money around, but newer investors are very quiet at the moment.
Well, I suppose another point is they're not heading for the doors. They're not having to sell and liquidate either, which is interesting. And that's something that we're seeing overseas as well. So if you're talking about average trade sizes being meaningful for those who've been around for a while, what are they trading?
Yeah, it's super interesting. That point you made about them, they're not selling, right? And I do think that's really important. This is not the GFC where people just got burnt out and left the market altogether. There's really good data that says there are, or there were prior to COVID, fewer share market investors in Australia, retail investors, than there were prior to the GFC, because so many people just sold out of shares and never came back during the GFC. It was such a painful experience for people. We haven't seen anything like that. Like, people are not feeling burnt out or anything. They're just hanging on to what they have and happy to keep it there. So what are they trading? They're trading lithium. Let's be honest, that's what they're trading. It's the thing, and I think what you learn from these particular periods is there's always something, right? There's a little part of the market that's going to be doing extraordinarily well, and that is that part. And thankfully, a lot of our guys were on it really early, so they have an opportunity to take profits on things that have run super hard, which is basically everything, and actively trade where they see opportunities at the margin in that space. So Pilbara Minerals has finally pipped out Fortescue. So there is something that is consistently in the numbers above Fortescue, and it's Pilbara Minerals. That's been probably 2 weeks now, but it's been Fortescue for like a year and a half. So quite excited to see something else. Actually, it's a bit thrilling. And then quite a meaningful tale of other things after that, but all in the battery metal space.
Got it. All right. So Pilbara, that will be now on the list consistently, most likely. New Hope, I mentioned it just a bit ago. One of the best performers today. Absolutely spitting out cash and promising that shareholders could be in for more money coming through in the near future. So has that been getting any attention?
This is really interesting. There's been a real transition away from those sorts of companies, right? For a long, long time, not least because they weren't delivering much for people. So those who are holding are trimming right now. And we've been seeing that for a while. It's quite interesting to see. So it's come up the numbers. It's clearly a sell, quite an aggressive sell, but it would be interesting to see whether people transition back into it if the price pulls back, right? And I don't really necessarily see that happening. We've seen with Woodside that there was a lot of trimming because the price ran super hard, but as soon as it pulled back in June, people were buying it again. They still really like the company. They were just taking profits. Whether we see that with New Hope's another question. I don't think we will, to be honest.
Okay, so that's coal. Lots of considerations when it comes to coal. How about internationally, Gemma? I know Tesla's always front of mind. Are we seeing any sort of squaring up there?
Yeah, whether there's a huge thematic here or it's just where people see themselves making money, because you can see people withdrawing from coal, right? That's been going on for quite a long time, and as I said, for a meaningful period of that time, it's because they weren't making any money out of it, as well as ethical considerations or environmental considerations. And lithium's rocketing up the charts. And the question is that because it's a decarbonisation story and people feel strongly about it from an ESG perspective, or is it just because that's where the trade is and that's where they're going to make money? It's very hard to say. You can only see the activity, not what's driving it. We see the same thing in the US. So we've seen this massive enthusiasm for Tesla for such a long time. I think that is as much an Elon Musk story as it is an EV story, but it's also a growth story, right? It's the only obvious way a lot of our investors saw to get exposure to that. The one that's really interesting is Tritium, which is a Brisbane-based company, or they started in Brisbane anyway. EV charging stations, extraordinarily impressive business, mentioned by Joe Biden. That's always nice when you've got president of the free world, theoretically, mentioning you in an address many months ago as being, ironically, American manufacturing was the story that he was telling. But he was talking about where the growth would be coming from in terms of decarbonisation and so on. So a lot of our investors are looking for that decarbonisation story. It's a great story. They're listed on the NASDAQ, even though it started here. And we're seeing we're buying in that big trades, right? $100,000 plus. Kind of cool.
Yeah, we interviewed that company a while back. If you want to go online, just type in the name and you can listen in. All right, Gemma, any other sort of nuggets for us as we bid you farewell this week? I mean, feels as if we've got past a lot this week, even if it wasn't positive for markets. You know, we now know that at 75 basis points, we've now had the BOE hike. In fact, 6 central banks just last night hiking as well. We're in for a rocky ride, you've got to think, for the end of the year.
I think it's so interesting for investors. I gave a presentation back in May, and it was one of those rare moments when you actually say what needs to be said and think, thank God I said that then, which is Tina's over, right? So the whole there's no alternative principle, that has finished for investors. And now equities, you have to be far more thoughtful. I think what's encouraging for us is we are seeing investors be far more thoughtful. You can't just buy anything and assume it'll bounce out of its lows really quickly. You have to be quite careful about where you put your money. We are seeing those experienced investors and traders do that. They are making careful, thoughtful decisions. They're trading the fun parts of the market, right, and having a great time. But the rest of them are being super thoughtful about what they do. They're hanging on to the high quality stuff. They're trimming the things that have run too hard. And I think long term, that's the right way to play this environment. But as you say, the macro picture is really quite extraordinary. It's been a long time since people have seen this. There are many who have never seen it at all. So it's interesting to watch how investors respond to this kind of environment. It's challenging.
It sure is. All right. That's where we'll leave it. Gemma, thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Great to speak to you.